Thank you for joining us for the Summit Racing Facebook Live. Today we are joined by a truly amazing racer and a true American success story. He perfected the rear-engine top-fuel dragster, has been a huge proponent of safety improvements in drag racing, and was the first drag racer to officially surpass 170, 180, 200, 240, and 270 miles per hour in the quarter mile. He won 10 American Hot Rod Association championships, 4 IHRA championships, and 3 NHRA championships, a total of 17. And he won a total of 144 national events. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with the one and only Big Daddy Don Garlits. Don, thank you so much for joining us today. It is truly an honor for Brian and I to be here with you today. And I just can't thank you enough. How are you doing, and how are things in Florida today?
Well, it's a beautiful, balmy day down here, and I'm doing just fine. Of course, when you get to my age, every day you wake up is a good day.
That's right.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, hopefully there's many, many more of those, Don. And again, thank you so much. Brian and I are super excited to talk to you today. Our team at Summit, when they heard you were going to be on with us, the questions just started coming. There's a lot of great questions that our customers and our team at Summit wanted us to ask you. And before we get into the questions, we'll get into those a little bit later, but we want to talk about your history. Your history is absolutely amazing. And I'd like to specifically have you talk about what was the moment or the time when you were a young man and you said, I want to go drag racing. I'm going to go do that. And you started to build that first car. Could you talk about that and that moment when it all happened and you just said, I am absolutely going to go do that?
Well, there wasn't any drag racing at the time, not around here. Now, they were drag racing in California, but I didn't know much about that. But a friend of mine had a round track car, and I was a body and paint man. So I put a real nice paint job on the car, and we got it all lettered up and went out to the track. And he was a pretty good driver. And he won one of the early races, one of the heats. So he got in one of the final heats that was going to put him into the big race. And one of the old guys just bumped him right over the wall and smashed it all up. And of course, we were out of the race then for the rest of the night. And he's over there with a ball peen hammer beating out the body and everything. And I thought to myself, this isn't what I want to do. And so a few of my friends felt the same way. So we went up to Zephyr Hills, Florida, talked with the city fathers and got them to let us use the old abandoned Army Air Force training field. And that was our first drags at Zephyr Hills. It was about 18 of us, no trophies, no clocks. Everybody raced everybody, no class. And we raced morning till dark at the time of our lives. And I knew I wanted to drag race.
That's phenomenal. So really our entire speed industry was opening up at that time. And, parts weren't as easily available as they are today. So you were building a lot of your own stuff, had to, work with your own, fabrication skills, which evolved, and, working with friends that had ideas for, building chassis and things. Can you tell us about the earlier days when you were just having, nobody made what you needed, you just had to make it yourself and try it and improve on it?
Well, yeah, the original Swamp Rat that broke the 170 mile an hour record was a frame rails out of a 31 Chevy. You took all the cross members out, you cut all the rivets off and took it all apart, and you put your own cross members in. We mounted a Ford rear end in it, a Ford transmission, and hooked a Chrysler Hemi engine to it, a 1954 Chrysler Hemi, on gasoline. And we went to the drags. And I mean, this was the car was a winner right to start off with, because that Chrysler engine was so powerful. And it doesn't look like it looks like in this picture. It didn't have all that pretty body and everything on it. But
Right.
That's the frame right there that you're looking at is the original frame that I got out of the 31 Chevy in 1956 on West Hillsborough at Auto Parts.
And something I want to remark to all of the viewers here today, when they look at that machine and the thought of what you made it out of, and the fact that a lot of cars back in that time, were, hard pressed to do 100, 105, 110, and you're doing 170 miles an hour with something home built, very small, Not a lot of safety gear available at that time, other than what the airplane pilots had, of course, with the helmets and things. That's pretty amazing to strap into that thing and just let the thing go.
Yeah, we had a seat belt out of a B-17 bomber, and what we call a skid lid was the helmet. It wasn't much of a protection, just under your head. And we drove those cars in T-shirts and just regular pants. Never thought about any fire or anything like that. That's why when I had that terrible fire in 1959, I was nearly burned to death.
Yeah. So really a lot of the safety industry was actually born out of Florida. I can think of some of the bigger companies there, just because I guess you were doing it and needed stuff for it. One other thing, before we talk a lot about your history, we have the comments already starting to pour in. One thing that we love here at Summit Racing is hearing from our fans. Obviously Don's fan are tuning in today. So tell us your name, tell us where you're from. If you have some comments or questions for Don, now's your chance to ask them. We will try to get to those questions of yours. If we can't get it done here in this 45 minutes or an hour or whatever we have, we'll come in after we're all said and done with this thing here today and try to go through and just fill in answers and comments as we can. But again, we're as excited to see you as you are to join us today. So I guess what's next?
Yeah, Don, next on our list today is talking about your favorite race cars and your favorite innovations. Over the years, you've just done an amazing job of being so innovative and so creative. And we'd love to hear, what were those aha moments, or what were the biggest things when you did those? Obviously the rear engine dragster, that's huge. That changed the sport forever. Also, you're pioneering and working with safety equipment companies. I think a lot of us current racers today, Brian and I both race in a variety of different forms, and can't honestly thank you enough for having great safety gear available today, because if it wasn't for pioneers like you, it probably wouldn't be available, and we'd be out looking for football helmets or who knows what to race with. So we're super thankful of you for doing that. But what are some of those innovations? And then also, what were your favorite race cars? Like, out of all the cars you've had, and there have been so many of them, are there any one or two or three that stick out and you say, that car was awesome, it was just the best car ever?
Well, yeah, Swampert 1 always is my number one favorite. Of course, the innovation on that was the fuel delivery system. We had under the hood, that's why I always had that full body and a belly pan, was a fuel delivery system that a lot of volume of nitromethane into the engine that most of the guys didn't have. And that's how I was able to go 176 and then 180. And of course, Swampert 22 was really a fancy car. That's for over 250 miles an hour, 5.63 seconds. That record stood for a full 7 years. And then, of course, 26 was in the museum, was built in 1980. We brought it out and refurbished it in 1984, won the U.S. Nationals, and then went out west and won the World Finals and got back into drag racing. And we built Swampert 30, which was the car with the covered front wheels, which is in the Smithsonian. And then, of course, my really favorite modern one is Swampert 34. That was sponsored by Summit, and that carried me to 323 miles an hour in 4.73 seconds. And that was the most exciting ride of my life. So those are the cars that are the favorites. Innovations. One of the innovations was the big fuel pump on Swampert 26 with the 3 port nozzles. Was able to get so much volume into it. Everybody thought I was nuts, but then everybody has that kind of thing today, and that was one of I could tell right away that was a good innovation, the volume. It was always about fuel volume, trying to get more volume into the engine was the big thing in nitromethane.
So, yeah, I mean, in the early times of nitromethane, I guess you guys were mixing, relatively small percentages, 15, 20, and 25, and 30. And then I guess you guys just went whole hog with it, Can you tell me about that transition of experimenting with nitromethane to having it become the primary fuel?
Well, we always went about 25% in the flatheads, you know, and then when we went to the Chrysler Hemi, because they had those cast iron heads, we were afraid that you couldn't run much more than that because of the heat. And then we heard that Cook and Bedwell were running 98%. Now, this is unblown engines in these days. And
Right.
so we went to Cordova, and I just went right over to him, and I said, Mr. Cook, I said, I can only get 25% nitro in my Hemi through my starter carburetors, and I understand that you get 98%. How do you do that? And he just, in one sentence, he rattled off all of the diameters of the dump tubes, the jets, the needle valves, how much pressure, and it was just one sentence. And of course, it was just like, it went into my mind as like a steel trap, you know. And my
Heck
wife
yeah.
said, what did he say? I said, we got a lot of work to do. We got to get out of here. And we went straight to the gas station in Cordova and took the 6 carburetors apart and modified them, came back to the race, and outran him in the first round. They were so stunned that it happened. They said, in all fairness to the world champion, we'll have to see that run again. They lined us up again, and it outran him again. And that really gave me a big start in professional racing. I knew that you could beat the California cars, because prior to that, one of my friends here says, oh, you'll never be able to beat the Californians. And then I went up to Cordova and beat their best. And it just gave me such an incentive, you know, to do more. And of course, I was learning as I went along. And I came back here and actually improved on the fuel system that he had and was able to break his record. He'd won 168, and we raised it to 176.
Right. So this is something I also want to try to get across to folks here. So when people on the West Coast were running, or you were running, you know, news didn't fly like it does today with the internet and live streaming and videos right there. You know, you might have some friends that get on the, you know, phone with you and say, hey, this guy just ran this, or this guy's rumored to do that. You know, what was it like back then, you know, trying to figure out who was doing what and where you were stacked up with everybody else?
Well, this was Top Fuel was what we were interested in. Believe it or not, the whole deal hinged on drag news. It came out every week, and I'll tell you, we couldn't get our hands on it fast enough. They did a wonderful service for drag racing back in those days, covering all the fuel meets and everything that everybody did. And it was like the Bible of drag racing.
That is awesome. So Don, let's talk about competitors. So obviously you're a very competitive gentleman, and I am sure there are competitors that when you race them and you won, it felt even better than some of the others that you'd beat. Who would those people be? Do you have any competitors that you think of your nemesis and you think, man, that was the greatest race ever when I got the opportunity to beat them? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there were 3 competitors. You know, we're talking about probably the match racing especially. And of course, you didn't always meet these people in the rounds at the nationals, but sometimes you did. But Shirley Muldowney, Don Perdome, Chris Garlits were the fierce ones. Now, the one that I raced a lot was Tommy Idle, but that was a match race special because he was such a showman. It got people, but we didn't didn't make record runs because neither one of us was trying to win so much as we were trying to put on a good show for the people. And, you know, if you broke your car during the match race, you might not get the match race finish. And we were well known for doing all 3 rounds. But the Greek was a tough competitor, very, very tough. He'd been around since 1959, and he was the longest one. I mean, he just quit racing like a year ago. But the fiercest one that you had to race was Shirley Muldowney, because every run that she made was do or die. There were no easy runs, none of that. Every time she went the line, you knew she was going to win the race if you didn't give it all you had. And the only thing that really kept her from going any faster than what she was, a lot of the tracks we ran on, you could only go so fast because this is the days before sprint tracks and the tracks the way they're prepared today. We just went out and ran on these places that were just asphalt. And there was a lot of smoking tires, but in those days when you smoked, you didn't necessarily lose because you weren't smoking on a sprayed track like you are today. See, when you spin the tires on a sprayed track, you park. You don't go anywhere. It's over.
Right. So you want to talk about tire technology? I mean, the tires you guys started off with, and really when people started more, I guess building more dedicated rubber. What years would you say that was when you started seeing that?
Well, the first record in 176 was set on Bruce slicks. They were made in Oakland, California. They were 7 inches wide, and they were the tire to have on your car in those days. And a friend of mine who was in round track racing used M&H tires on his round track car. And when I went to 176, he came out to the shop and looked at those recaps, and he says, Don, he said, those things are sitting right next to you. You could throw a cap off here, it would kill you. He said, you need to try a set of these M&H tires. They were called cruisers for round track cars. They were about 6.5 inches wide. They were half inch narrower than that Bruce. And I went up to Chester, South Carolina, and I said, low ET, the meat on those tires, $8.95. And it just so happened that Marvin and Harry Rifkin, Harry was the dad, that's why it's M&H, were just there looking around, thinking about maybe getting into drag racing. And here I showed up. I turned 176 miles an hour and then had low ET of the meat on a set of their cruiser tires that were made for round tracks, and they took
circle track tires.
Awesome.
We're going to make an 8-inch wide tire and get into drag racing, and that put M&H in drag racing.
Awesome.
Boy, that's amazing. And thinking that you went that fast on that little of a tire, today there's, big tire racing, small tire racing, drag radial racing, all kinds of stuff. But back then, that fast on that tire, that took a lot of guts and a lot of stones, Don. I mean, that is something else. That is flying.
Yeah.
Wow.
We spun the tires from the start to the finish.
Just two black marks all the way down the track, huh?
Yeah, that was the famous 2 black marks right through the lights. When you'd done that, you had a good run.
So that was something else that I was, kind of curious about. As the cars go faster, you're probably, trading weight for stability. And there were ratios of car, like a slingshot would be like 6-to-1 or something like that. And then the car started growing in length. Can you tell us a little bit how you kind of figured out how long the car had to be to keep settled down?
Well, we figured out early on that the wheelbase was important. The further the front wheels were away from the rear wheels, the more percentage of the car was on the rear wheels. And then if the front wheels wanted to lift, it didn't take near as much weight on those to hold it down. So a long wheelbase car with a little bit of weight on the front was all you needed, that you had that leverage factor. And so that's why they'd be even longer if it wasn't for the NHRA. When they got to 300 inches, they said, that's it, we don't want them any longer. If they were longer, they'd actually be faster than they are today.
Right. Well, you kind of point out something there that, there are so many parts to build a race car. We talked a little bit about the nitro, and we've talked a little bit about the rubber and all that. But you were big into aero as well. I mean, you had a lot of very advanced concepts. I mean, there's the streamliner. There's also you going out to Bonneville, which is a whole other thing. But, can you tell us about the, aerodynamics when you started thinking about trying to push against the wind and, trading a little bit of weight, to get some, higher speeds down track?
Well, I've always been into aerodynamics. When I was a Boy Scout, I made several very aerodynamic little streamliners, getting the aerodynamics merit badge. And I knew that aerodynamics was real important, so I always had that in my mind. And I would try different streamlining ideas, and they some worked, some didn't. The big streamliner was a little on the heavy side. That was a problem with that. The winter, it was just too heavy, and you gave up too much to start with. But some of the concepts on Swamp Rat 30, where I put the front wheels under cover and had the driver enclosed, that was really good. And then, of course, 34, where we took all that wing down and had a nice rudder on the back holding the wing up. That was very aerodynamic. That car on that 323 run, picked up 65 miles an hour from the 8th to the end. And it was 3 full miles an hour more gain than any car had made at that point in drag racing.
Phenomenal.
Wow.
Got it. Yeah, it's neat to think about, having those advancements and, having the wing on the front of the car to keep the nose down, and probably thinking about how you had that trimmed out. And then, planes and aerodynamics have never been that disassociated with cars. I mean, even to this day, we still share a lot between those two things. So that's pretty cool.
Well, the first wing on the rear engine car was, we ran that car for 3 or 4 events before we had a wing on the back of it. And I went up and did a match race in Shuffletown with Ivo, and he outran me 3 straight because the track was a little slick. So we came back to Tampa and we put a wing on the back of it, and the car picked up a full quarter of a second and 10 miles an hour, just adding that little wheel with the rear tires.
Just able to put the power down.
And plus the car was much easier to drive, and that was the end of the slingshot. When we did that, there wasn't anything the slingshots could do to keep up with. Because what happened, the disadvantage of the slingshot at that time was the driver was sitting in back of the rear tires, which he didn't need to be because the tires were nice and big and fat and got plenty of height. And so we have the driver sitting in back of the rear tires, and then we have to put 200 pounds of lead on the front to hold the front down. And you didn't have to do that with a rear engine car. You didn't need all the lead. The driver moved up front. He had better vision, better control of the car, and the car got a couple 100 pounds lighter. I mean, you can't beat a combination like that.
So win, win, win. And then, it wasn't just Hemis either. You're sticking helicopter turbine engines into things. I mean, you weren't shy. And we're going to get into the other thing that you started doing in the 2017-18 timeframe with another power plant. But, tell us about when you were, messing around with the turbines.
Well, I was good friends with Craig Arfons, and he always thought the turbine engine would be superior. And AHRA actually would allow us to use that turbine in top fuel. And he was convinced that we could come up with a car that would be very light, under 1,000 pounds, and would compete with the top fuel dragster. So we went to work on that. And the engines were supposed to have about 2,200 horsepower with the alcohol water injector. But I don't think we ever got up to that kind of speed because it just didn't perform like Craig wanted it to. And he worked with us quite a bit on the engine. And there again, it was an engine. I couldn't do anything with the engine. I didn't know that much about them. But, I did the chassis and drove the car. And so after a while, it didn't make any noise. That was another problem. The mattresses, they hated it. It was too quiet. And so we put the project up because it wasn't popular. And we never did really get the power that we were supposed to get out of the engine.
Right.
Interesting. Don, out of all the events and tracks that you've been at, what's the favorite event that you've had that you've won? And also, are there racetracks that are top of the list for you, the places that you love to go, the places you love to race? Can you talk about some of the places you've been and not just in the U.S., because we know you've been really all over the world throughout your career?
Well, my favorite racetrack is Gainesville because it's got so much shut off. You can actually not have a parachute open and you'd be fine there. If all the tracks had been as long as Gainesville, they'd still be running a quarter of a mile. But then Indianapolis is really special. That's a special place. And, if you ask anybody if they had to pick one race a year that they would like to win, it would always be Indy. That'll never change. It doesn't have the shutoff that Gainesville's got, but it is a nice track, and I really love it. But thinking of what races that I've won that stand out in my mind, it has to be the 1975 Ontario World Finals for the NHRA for the end of the Winston. That was the first year of the Winston Championship. And it was a hard-fought race between Gary Beck and myself. Every week, the points would bounce back and forth. And then for the World Finals for IHRA, I was leading in the points, and it didn't look like Gary could possibly outrun me and get. In other words, by coming to the event, he could win. He was going to be second no matter what. And NHRA decided to put the fall nationals together and put it on that same date. And so Gary Beck goes to the fall nationals and doesn't fulfill his contract with the IHRA, and he wins the fall nationals and puts him over 400 points ahead of me coming into Ontario. They were already referring to him as the world champion because I was going to have to win the race, set the world record, and the record was 249.30. So that means you're going to have to go 250 miles an hour, and you're going to have to set the ET record, and you're going to have to go out of the race holding both those records. That's how that was the rules then.
Wow.
And that was a pretty formidable task, especially in California with all the good cars that are out there. And I did, in fact, go there. I set the record at 250.69, 5.63 seconds, which I told you earlier, for 7 years. And I did win the race. And it was with a special motor that I had built just for that event. And when I got through it, I took it home and I took the motor out of the car, and I didn't use it again for years and years because it was hard on parts. It was just, we just had to make a lot more power. That's all there was to it. And I couldn't match race with a motor like that, but it would be too expensive. You'd be always putting parts in it. But it took about 7 years for everybody to figure out what I must have done through trial and error, trying different stuff, and finally they got it, and everybody started going 250.
Gotcha. So we have a question here from Michael King. Did you get the name Swamp Rat by running off the end of the old track Twin City in Hillsborough County on South Mobley Road? How did you get the Swamp Rat name for your cars there?
Well, the Swamp Rat name actually came from Seto Postorian in Detroit, Michigan. He put a half-page ad in Drag News, and it said, "It's no wonder they call you Swamp Rat. You're in this sport for what you can get. You don't care who you hurt, just so you make a dime out of it. You shoot your mouth off about safety, and then you put a green kid in the world's fastest dragster and send him down the drag strip." And it went on and on like that. I have the first part memorized because I've read it so many times. And I really got mad about it. But there was a guy there, George Roberts, was working at the museum on a movie, a drag racing movie at the time. And he said, "Swamp Rat, that's a good name. Let's call the car Swamp Rat. I'll have my artist draw one." So the artist drew that little swampy that's so famous that you see on everything. And the cars became the Swamp Rat, and I was the Swamp Rat. And that stuck until the Big Daddy name got pinned on me in 1962 at the U.S. Nationals. I went there on gasoline only. They weren't nitromethane then. And I was having a hard time getting the gas car to run. I wasn't too familiar with how the gas worked. And they were calling me Daddy Garlits because I had the two little girls with me. And they were saying, "Daddy's over the hill. He's too old." I was 30 years old, but the gas were kids, they were youngsters. And then I got in Connie Coletta's car, the Bounty Hunter, and set the world record, 180.36, took it away from Ivo, who had it at 180 with the twin engine dragster.
Right.
And Bernie Partridge screamed out over the BA, "Well, we're going to have to call him Big Daddy from now on. He just set the world record." Went out on the Associated Press, and it's been there ever since.
That rocks.
That's awesome. That's great stuff. Don, let's talk. You mentioned earlier about the turbine engine car, and it reminded me about something that you've been involved with when you said that the crowd at match races didn't like it because it didn't make noise. And that would be the EV dragster project that you've worked on. At Summit, we've actually begun to do some investigating and researching into the EV car market because we see it growing and we think it's going to be growing for sure. And your history with it and the dragster. Can you talk a little bit about that project and if you foresee doing anything more with that in the future?
Yeah, we may not like it, but electric cars are here to stay, and they may not be here as fast, overwhelming us as the government would like for them to be, and that's because we don't have generating capacity, nor do we have the grid to support charging these electric cars every night. But they are here, and they're going to stay here because they are cleaner. And the thing about it is, an internal combustion engine is real clean when it's brand new. And then as it wears, it gets a little more pollution, but it's just still running real good. So you can't expect the people to throw the cars away just because they got 50, 60,000 miles on them. But the cities will be first to be all electric. And as the technology changes, there will be more and more electric cars. And I got into it kind of as a quirk because Daryl Gwynn and I did some match races with the two electric dragsters that were basically just glorified golf carts that looked like dragsters. They only went 30 miles an hour. But we had a good time and we raised a lot of money for the Spinal Cord Injury Foundation. But I always wondered just how fast you could actually go. So I said to Mike Gary, we built the two cars. How fast do you think we could go if we took the gloves off? See, we could only go so fast with the cars that Daryl and I had because Daryl only had the little wobble stick to control the car. He didn't have a steering wheel or pedals, nothing like I had. So it was a little tricky. So 30 miles an hour was about it. So he said he thought we could go 200 miles an hour. So that excited me because here was something I could get into and do whatever I wanted to do and make changes. And I didn't have to stick to such strict rules that they have in Top Fuel. See, Top Fuel is it's a car that's a spec car. It's built to certain specs and you can't have anything else. And because it's a safety factor, they're trying to slow them down. You realize if they took the gloves off in Top Fuel and said, just build whatever you want, boys, they'd be going 356 miles an hour in a quarter mile, and there'd be a lot of people getting hurt because that's a little too fast for that kind of distance, and especially the shutoff that we have. But
Right.
I did build a car that just in the picture is Swamp Rat 37 that held the record at 185.6, 7.25 seconds. And then we built Swamp Rat 38, which was a much lighter car. It raised the record to 189.04. And then the coronavirus hit, and we had all kinds of trouble getting the drag strips and everything. We just quit kind of working on it. The battery technology is changing. And I would really like to have the new batteries for Swamp Rat 38 before we go back out to the track. But I don't know how soon that new technology will be available for just anybody. It's really tricky, the charging. The cars will go all the way to California, Florida without a charge, and they charge up in just a few minutes, not hours like it is. It's a whole new world out there. This electric vehicle.
Well, yeah, I mean, we agree with you. It's like, when you went with the turbine engine, for instance, or the first time you stuck, that load of nitro in the thing, you have to learn a lot about, you're a guy that likes to learn. You like to do things through learning. And that's something that a lot of people may never get. But when they ask you why you're going electric, it's like, it's new. It's something I haven't done before. It's fascinating. So if people wonder why sometimes, just because, well, it's like I wanted to learn about something else, figure out what makes the motor do what it does, the motor controllers, the battery. And so that's all the excuse a guy like you needs to go out there and try different things.
Well, there's a little trivia here that you probably don't know. My father was an engineer at Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he was on the team that invented the electric iron and the electric fan.
No kidding.
Yep, that's a fact.
Huh.
So you got a long history with electric variety of things, right, Don? So this is just natural.
Yeah, he's up there just smiling about all this stuff. He loved electricity. I never forget when I was a kid. If the light bulb wasn't burning, he screwed the light bulb out of the socket, put his finger, wet the end of his finger, and stuck it up in the socket to see if there was electricity up there. And he had me do that one. And oh my God, it just sent this shock through my arm. I couldn't stand it. He says, I can't believe that it bothers you like that.
All right. So here's another question. You've been out to Bonneville, you know, and you had to be looking at, you know, those guys out there on the salt and, you know, the streamliners where, you know, it's all about frontal area and stuff. And I knew that you love that stuff. So you built your car to go, you know, you build a car to go do that. You didn't buy a car, you didn't whatever. I mean, you build a car to go do that. Can you tell us, I mean, what made you decide to go do Bonneville at a certain point?
Well, I'd never been to Bonneville because it always came up at a time in the year when I was real busy. But I got in touch with a couple of people that Speedway Motors was a big part of it. You know, Bill Smith, he paid a lot of the money to help me with it to come out there. He was a dear friend of mine. And Zenza, Mike Zenza, I think his name was one of the guys that helped. And it was a big team. There was a lot of guys involved in that. And we did it with a flathead engine with a supercharger. And it was went over 217 miles an hour average.
Right.
And it was a real thrill to drive down that Bonneville track. You know, it's 10 miles long. And the one run, I didn't even want to shut off. I just kept driving. It was going faster and faster, you know. And there was plenty of room. And they fussed at me about that because they got so far to get me. It was like 10 miles ahead to come get me.
No, I get it.
Awesome.
So what is that like, you know, because, you know, we worship these engines, you know, the flathead and the Hemi and all that stuff. And you were there for the first go around of these engines. And, you know, it's kind of funny to think about you still going out there and building something, you know, I don't know how much the technology, I'm not a flathead specialist, but, you know, what is it like building those engines that you've been around all your life and they're still here?
Well, I just love it. You know, I have a whole lot of them in my shop that run. In fact, I just run a bunch of them this morning. Ardens, I have all that kind of stuff there on run stands, and I can go back there and start them up anytime I want. And I take my friends back there, and sometimes on private tours and start them. People have never heard of Arden Run. You know, that's that overhead valve conversion kit for a flathead Ford that raises it from 100 horse to about 180 horse, and it's an awesome kit. And Duntoff did that, him and his brother, and of course he's of Corvette fame. Everybody knows him from Chevrolet, but very few know that he's the actual father of the Arden.
So we have a question from Mopar Man. He said, a question for Don. What was it like racing the Surfers crew back in the day?
I only ever raced the Surfers once. They never did come up in the rounds. They mostly stayed in California the biggest part of the time. They were a really nice group of kids. They were youngsters, and they really liked to tilt the can. They just ran 100% nitro all the time. And they knew how to do it, and they made some awesome runs. And they're almost like urban lore, you know, the stories about them. It's just they're of legends.
That's really
fill
cool.
the tank up and send it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So Don, I want to ask you about some of the late model Hemis that you've run. So I know a few years ago you ran one of the Dodge Challenger, you know, factory stock cars. And what do you think of what's going on? I think the Mopar brand has just done a tremendous job with, you know, the Hellcats and the Demons and all the development over time. Yeah, has that got a Hemi in it? How many times have we heard that? I'd love your opinion of that because, yeah, there's a great picture of some of the cars in your museum, and we'll talk about the museum in a minute because what an amazing place that is. But what's your take on the late model Hemi stuff, and you know, what were your thoughts on driving that car?
Well, I just love the late model Hemis. They remind me, they're a little lightweight engine, almost like a small block Chevy with heads. They make a lot of power. You know, they had me drive the very first two prototypes of 2008. They built two of them. Judy Lilly drove one, and I drove one. We debuted them at the Mopar Nationals up at Denver. Had a great time. And I came home, and my wife said, she'd asked me not to drive Top Fuel anymore because it scared her so bad. And I come back from Denver. She said, "Did you enjoy the race out there with Judy Lilly?" I said, "I did." And she said, "Why don't you get you one of the 2009 cars? We offer them." So I did. I got 2009 001, and I did a lot of national events with that car. I had a really good time with it. Ran like 10.0, 135 miles an hour. And it's the best I ever got out of it. It should have went a little better, but I think it was some tuning problems that I was having with it. I was thinking too much of nitromethane and not enough gasoline. But then I got the drag pack, the 2011 car, the one with the Viper motor in it that went 145.
Yeah.
940s. That was a good car too. I still have that. I had a lot of fun with it. It just there's just something about a dragster that a full car doesn't turn me on as much as a dragster does. It's just, I guess it's just in my blood. And so that's why I did build the electric car, because I really want a car to go 200 miles an hour, and I'm so sorry I didn't reach that yet. But I'm not through with that project. I'll be back out on the track again. I would like to break the guy's record that Steve Huff went 201. I'd like to break that record. And
So when are you going to put a late model Hemi in a dragster?
okay, I have a late model Hemi. There's a little story if you got time for it.
I got
Sure,
time.
absolutely.
I've worked with Chrysler since 1961. I've built projects for them. I've done research and development. And then in 2007, they called me up and they said, "We want you to take one of these late model Hemis and turn it into blown top fuel. We want to do some dyno work. We're going to send you 3 engines." So they sent me 3 drag pack engines down here that they had held a dyno, and they couldn't put them into cars, just experimental stuff. And that's what I want to use. So I pulled one of the engines out. We made everything: homemade intake manifold, motor drive, the whole works. And I told them, I said, "Now I'm a little nervous about you guys doing dyno testing with nitromethane. It's dangerous. Because you got to have fuel inside the dyno cell with the engine. If you had any kind of an explosion and you have pressure in there, you actually generate a pretty good size explosion." But I said, "I just do what you want. You ask for the engine, I got it." So I got it all ready to ship. And I said, "Where do you want me to ship this thing?" And they said, "We've had some second thoughts about the dyno room and the nitromethane." I said, "Good." I said, "Have you got a car we could put it in?" I said, "I got just a car." I had the 1968 Swamp 12A that I had in California for just those 3 months of winter racing, which real short wheelbase, lightweight, didn't do well. I came back and built 12B, which was a killer. Won the Spring Nationals, U.S. Nationals car over 240. Won the PDA championships in California. A really great car. And I sold that car to some kids with a small block Chevy, and later got it back when they ran off the strip in Bennett. And then I had repaired it. But I never did anything with it because it didn't do anything. I wasn't really concerned. So I put this engine in that car for Chrysler, and we put a full body on it because they got a partnership with Winds, and they want to make a national television commercial. And we go down to Bradenton, and I make about 30 head passes because it doesn't have the full roll cage and all that. So NHRA wouldn't like you making full runs with it without the proper safety stuff. But to go half-ass, it's like a burnout, is okay. We took that little engine all apart, and it was just perfect. It really responded so well. And because of that way they've got that combustion chamber configured to have squish areas to get the gas mileage up to meet the federal standards, the nitromethane loved that. It was just putting these beautiful flames up out of the pipe, 4 feet in the air, and it became my cackle car. And from 2007 to this very day, that's the car that I take to the Cackle Fest, and I've ever had so much fun with it in all my life. The little car that started out was a complete failure, and now it's one of my favorites that I go to the shows with.
Phenomenal.
That is awesome.
Got it.
Don, let's talk about your museum. So a real quick story, and I don't know if you remember this, but years ago I worked for a company called Stainless Works. And one day our phone sales guy was really busy and the phones were ringing like crazy. So I grabbed the phone and the fellow on the other end of the line says, "Hey, do you make weld up header kits for Hemis?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure we can help you with that." And he said, "Okay, do you have them for $392? Do you have all the pipes?" And I said, yeah, we could sell you a Zumi kit. And he said, "Well, I'm working on a project at this museum, and can you get them shipped out today?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we can get all that done for you." And I said, "Where are we shipping it to?" And he said, "Well, my name's Don Garlits, and it's to my museum." And I said, "Wait a minute, the Don Garlits?"
Right.
And you just very matter-of-factly and humbly said, yeah, that's me. And I said, "Oh my gosh." And I was just blown away because ever since I was a kid, Don, I watched you racing and it was the coolest thing. At that time, you said, "Hey, if you guys are down here for the PRI show, come on by the museum and we'll show you around. We'll show you everything." So Scott Harrison, my salesperson at the time, he and I went to PRI and then we went to the museum. And if anybody is ever in that area, and it's been a while ago, I need to get down there at some point because I'm sure it's changed a lot. Yeah, road trip. Let's go.
Let's go.
But we go down there and we walked around the museum. You showed us around. You treated us like family. And the place was amazing. If somebody even thinks they kind of, sort of might like drag racing, go to the museum because you'll leave liking drag racing because there is so much stuff there and so much history. It is a phenomenal place. Can you tell us about the history of the museum, how you started it? How'd you do this? It's just amazing.
Well, I tell you, I had a lot of help from my friends and the man upstairs. Some of these things, it's a miracle that we retrieved them. There's cars that we retrieved that were on their way to the scrap pile, and we found out about it and got it stopped. But my wife and I got traveling in England in 1976, visiting the English Car Museum. We were so impressed with how they'd saved everything, and we didn't have a drag racing museum. I just casually mentioned to the guide, I said, "God, we ought to have a drag racing museum." And his name was Les Brooks. He's passed now, God rest his soul. He said, "Why don't you do it?" And so my wife and I came back to Florida and we built one. We had it for 6 years in Seffner and had no visitors. And then finally one day she says, "What are we going to do with this when you don't race anymore and can't support it?" And we thought it was going to be something was going to be supporting us. Instead of that, we're supporting it. But anyway, long story short, we moved it to Ocala, to this location where it's at now. I've been here for 36 years and it does well. We always have a lot of visitors every year, and it pays its own way and puts money in the bank, and we're able to expand slowly. We built more buildings, and we are a nonprofit, so that's good. And there's not going to be any auctions when I pass away. The children are just on the board of directors along with 6 other people, so it'll go on indefinitely as long as society continues on. As we see it, it'll be okay. Because
I'm looking
it's
at
the only
cars.
one on the planet that really shows the sport all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, I'm looking at the pictures right now, and they're just absolutely gorgeous. The machinery in there, just amazing.
I enjoy going in there myself, believe it or not. I like to go look. I especially like the antique building because that's where all the drag racing started for me. Those early Fords, and we got all of them. We got almost every one of the early Fords, a representative of almost every year. And some of those cars have really stories behind them. Low mileage cars. I got a '49 Ford in there with 6,000 original miles.
Wow.
Now you've got one of those that does 135 miles an hour. Which one is that one? Yeah. I can't remember which one it is, but there's one.
That'd have to be the one, my 39 with the Hemi engine in it.
That's the one. I mean, this thing's like, I can't even believe it, because that's flying,
Yeah, if you're brave enough to drive it that fast. Now, see, when I was young, it didn't make any difference. I didn't care. Now I realize something could happen to a tire or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
not such a lightweight engine in that car either. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, Don, that's a great place, and thank you for being the steward of that. And again, if anybody's ever in Florida, you've got to make a trip to the Don Garlits Museum. It is just a magical place. So much cool automotive history and memorabilia. Again, you will love it, and I can promise you that. So go there and visit, buy some parts from Summit, and you'll have a good day. I do want to get on, Don, to the questions, because we asked customers for some questions. And we asked our employees for some questions too. So we've got some really good ones. So Jerry Smith asks, what's going to be your next chapter in your life? Is there any more racing of any kind? And he mentions one of his biggest thrills was racing at E-Town the night you raced Shirley for the last time there. So everybody's got great memories of seeing you race and the things you did. Do you think are you planning to do much more racing, or are you gonna well, what's on the plan?
Well, I plan to continue this electric car program, and there is some plans in the works, maybe building an electric car that would have to reach 250 miles an hour. That's in the back of my head. So that's the plan for the future. And that Englishtown race, I remember it well. I won that race, and that's one of the special ones for me.
Nice.
That is really awesome. Another customer, Danny Grissom, asks, are there any plans for the Smithsonian to bring out Swamp Wrap 30 for display anytime soon? And how about that? I've been to the Smithsonian, but I don't recall seeing it. I'm not sure if they rotate. I know they do that because they have so much content and so many things out there. Have you heard anything about that, Don, or can you give us any update on that?
Yeah, I can tell you all about that. Well, they were supposed to have right now be opening the Smithsonian Motorsports Museum, but it got put on the back shelf for a couple of reasons. There was some things they wanted to do. They wanted to show more stuff about the Black community and some of their contributions to society, and so that put ahead of this museum. We think that it's going to open in 2022, and it will be so many of the cars that they have that nobody's ever seen, that has just been in storage. It will be a complete motorsports museum. Smithsonian and Swamp Wrap 30 will be on permanent display there.
That is fantastic. Glad to hear that, Don. That is awesome. Sherry Swisher asks a question, Don, about what speed innovation that you came up with that made the greatest performance gain? What would be that one thing when you look back on all the different things you've tried and tested over the years? What's the biggest thing? You mentioned aero earlier, and maybe that is it. But
or the fuel,
yeah, and the injectors. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the fuel always is, the volume of the fuel. But I'll always remember weighing on Swamp Wrap 14 and just going right up 10 miles an hour with no other change. And of course, it got faster as we learned how to use that wing. That was the innovation. Everything just worked perfect. And it also gave the car a nice look, to keep it balanced. It looked a little funny with the bob tail, but the wing finished it off. And I'd always say that wing was a great innovation.
Awesome.
That is awesome. So one other question, Don. Pee Wee Miller asked, is it true the engine blew up in Swamp Rat 1 or one of the early cars? You pulled the engine out of your tow vehicle, put it in the dragster, and it either went faster or you won the race, one of the two.
It wasn't a tow vehicle. It was one of our support cars. My wife and I had a 392 and 1957 Imperial Coupe. And we blew the engine at one of the tracks, Swamp Rat 3. And so we went to the garage, pulled the engine out of the Imperial, and this is when we ran just a stock block with stock bore and put the assembly into the new block. What it done, it had cracked a main, and put the new assembly into the Imperial engine and went back and won the race. And then, of course, we had to scout around the junkyards and get an engine for the Imperial to get home.
Your wife is a saint for putting up with you.
That is fantastic.
The tow truck was a GMC carryall, so couldn't use that engine with a V6.
That's awesome.
That is so cool. Don, Bob Arnold asks a question. After a life of racing and all kinds of different engineering, motorsports, auto sports developments, are there any regrets that you have? Anything you can look back on?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's a lot of things you look back on, like it was a day at Long Beach when I blew that transmission, and I know what happened now, but I'd be afraid to go back and change anything like that because look at the change that it made in the sport and the lives that it saved. You can't mess with anything like that. But that was a bad day, and the fire at Chester was a bad day too. I was nearly burned to death. And those are, you regret getting hurt like that, but you can't do much about it. It's just life. It's the way it goes on.
Got it.
Well, the safety improvements, Don, the innovations that you made as a result of that's definitely that case of making lemonade out of lemons for sure. I mean, it's just awesome that
thank you.
The approach you took to that, and you figured out, hey, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to make it better. And we're all appreciative for that for sure. So
yeah, the fire brought all the fire suits and all the gloves and all the good fire equipment. It was great,
Well, we're going to have to meet up soon. I'm definitely really wanting to head down to the track here pretty quick. It's a good time of the year for it right now too.
Absolutely. Don, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. You're a fantastic guest. You're a great ambassador of the sport. Just a great American success story. And it's an honor and a privilege for us to talk to you today. And we just can't thank you enough. The whole team at Summit wants to thank you. Our customers want to thank you. The comments are flying in of all the people who've met you over the years and how great it was meeting you at different races. And it's just amazing the impact on the sport and the whole entire automotive community you've had. So Brian and I cannot thank you enough. To our customers, thanks for joining us today. We love doing the Facebook Lives. This year we've tried to do about one per month of just great American success stories. Started off with Jay Leno, had Ken Lingenfelder last, and now Don Garlits. And Don, it's going to be hard to top this one. I don't know what Brian and I are going to do or who we're going to interview next, but the bar is high, and we thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I'm so happy to see that you're getting into some of the electric car stuff because that's something of the future for sure. There's no way we can change it. And this is the time to get involved while it's all young and on the ground floor.
We'll have to talk about that after the show.
Yeah, we will do that, Don, for sure. We'll talk more with you about that because it's been an interesting adventure so far, and we've got some interesting stuff we're working on. So we'll talk with you about that.
Okay, had a great time, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don.
Awesome.
Have a great day. Summit customers, again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Everybody.
And have a great weekend. Go out and enjoy your cars.
That's it. All right.
You
See you guys.
bet.